At the age of just 22, Alexander, ruler of the small Greek kingdom of Macedonia, had led an invasion of the vast Persian Empire. After a string of victories, he smashed Persian military power at the Battle of Gaugamela and took the Persian throne for himself. Now, in 330 BC, Alexander continued his march east. His goal was to find and kill Bessus, a Persian usurper, claiming to be the rightful king, and to subjugate the empire's eastern provinces. With the Persian Empire under his heel, Alexander headed first eastward, to the rugged landscapes of Arya, present-day Afghanistan. It was here that Satybarzanes, a Persian governor, dared to revolt, after initially pretending to submit to Alexander. However, the rebellion was crushed, and Satybarzanes met his end in single combat by a Greek cavalry officer. Alexander's response to rebellion was swift and decisive in order to maintain the integrity of his newly acquired empire and give a clear message to all those who thought revolting, "Don't." As Alexander ventured further into the east, he left behind a trail of newly founded cities, each a beacon of Hellenistic culture amidst foreign lands. Among these was Alexandria Ariana, modern-day Herat, a symbol of his ambition to integrate the diverse regions of his empire. This city was one of around a dozen cities that Alexander would eventually found, almost all bearing his name. Yet, the path to absolute power was fraught with peril. The Macedonian court, a nest of intrigue and treachery, was a constant reminder of the fragility of trust. 6 years before, Alexander's own father, King Philip, had been murdered by his bodyguard. He was now informed that Philotas, commander of his companion cavalry, had uncovered a plot to assassinate Alexander, but kept it secret. Philotas and his father Parmenion were among the most respected of Alexander's commanders, and had played crucial roles in all his great victories. But when Philotas confessed under torture, Alexander had him executed. Then he sent assassins back to Ecbatana, where Parmenion was governor, to kill him before he even heard of his son's death, and had a chance to turn against Alexander. In 329, Alexander resumed his pursuit of Bessus, leading Alexander deeper into the heart of Asia. Along the way, he founded Alexandria Arachosia, modern-day Kandahar, further solidifying his presence in the region. He and his army traversed a huge area of what had been the Eastern Persian Empire. As he went, Alexander received the submission of the local satraps and planted a series of colonies at strategic locations composed of his Macedonian and Greek veterans who could be spared, because Alexander's army was constantly being replenished by new recruits from Macedonia and Greece. As Alexander reached Kunduz, Bessus was betrayed by his own men and handed over in chains. Alexander sent him back to Persia for execution as a kingslayer. The capture and execution of Bessus marked a pivotal moment in Alexander's campaign. Yet even as he vanquished one enemy, new challenges emerged. Alexander pushed on into modern Tajikistan, where the Sogdians rose up against him. He had to fight off attacks by local tribes and take several towns by assault. The resistance of the Sogdians and the foundation of Alexandria Ishkate, the furthest, on the banks of the Jaxartes River, marked the outermost boundary of his conquests. This frontier was frequently raided by nomads known to the Greeks as Scythians. Alexander lured them into a decisive battle near the Jaxartes. The result was a crushing victory for the Macedonian king that put an end to the raids. But fighting against Bactrian and Sogdian tribes continued, frustrating Alexander and tying him down in a difficult guerrilla war. By now, many of the Macedonian troops were unhappy with Alexander. Most had not seen their homes in years, but their king seemed bent on conquest without end. What was worse, he'd begun to adopt the rituals and dress of their defeated Persian enemy, customs they viewed as effeminate and decadent. At Marakanda, modern Samarkand, after a furious drunken argument, Alexander killed Clytus the Black. The killing of his revered general and friend further alienated his commanders. Clytus had been one of Alexander's best generals, and the man who'd saved his life at the Battle of the Granicus. Alexander was full of remorse, but his growing arrogance was alienating more and more old comrades. But the worst was yet to come. The imposition of proskynesis, a Persian ritual of prostration before the king, tested the limits of their loyalty and highlighted the growing divide between Alexander and his Macedonian followers. To Greeks, this was blasphemy. Only a god was worthy of such respect, and Alexander was forced to back down. In Bactria, another plot to assassinate Alexander was uncovered. This time, the ringleader was a royal page, one of the sons of Macedonian nobility who attended the king. Hermolaus had become murderously bitter towards Alexander over a perceived injustice. He and his accomplices were tortured and then stoned to death. Callisthenes, Alexander's official historian, was also implicated in the conspiracy. He was thrown in prison, where he later died. That summer in 327, according to legend, Alexander became captivated by the beauty of Roxana, daughter of a Bactrian lord. Their marriage was also a sound political move, helping to end local revolt against his rule and allowing him to continue his advance into modern Pakistan and India. Alexander now prepared to subdue the Persian Empire's most eastern provinces, which had yet to recognize his kingship. To do so, he would first have to cross the Hindu Kush Mountains and reach the Indus River Valley. Advancing in 2 columns, his army won a series of skirmishes against the Aspasi and Assassini as they fought their way into what's now the Swat Valley of northern Pakistan. After a fierce siege, Alexander took the Assassinian capital of Macedonia. According to legend, it was ruled by a beautiful queen, Cleophas, who bore Alexander a son and was allowed to keep her throne. The alliance with the ruler of Taxila near modern Islamabad and the epic confrontation with Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes showcased his military prowess. Together they marched to face Porus, king of Pauravas, at the Battle of the Hydaspes. It was Alexander's costliest battle, as Porus's war elephants inflicted terrible casualties amongst the Greeks. But despite Porus's fearless leadership, the battle ended in a decisive victory for Alexander, winning him control of the Punjab. Alexander wanted to push on into India, to reach the great river which ancient Greek geographers said formed the edge of the world. Eventually, however, his troops mutinied on the banks of the Hydaspes River, homesick and daunted by rumors of a huge empire to the east, which were true. The Mauryan Empire was beginning to take shape at this time. His men had marched thousands of miles, fought countless battles, and not seen their homes in 8 years. They refused to go any further. They demanded to return westward. Only with great reluctance did Alexander agree. He followed the rivers of the Punjab to the sea, a journey that took 10 months. On the way, he defeated the Malayans, but while leading the assault on their capital, was wounded in the chest and nearly killed. On reaching the coast, part of the army, under Nearchus, boarded ships and returned to Persia by sea, sailing through the Straits of Hormuz and entering the Persian Gulf. It was one of the great ancient voyages of exploration, as these waters had been previously unknown to Greeks. Meanwhile, Alexander led the rest of the army back by land through the Gedrosian Desert, today in southern Pakistan. But extreme heat and shortages of food and water led to terrible suffering and many deaths among his army. He is thought to have lost more than half his men to hunger, thirst, and heat stroke on this march. On his return to Persia, Alexander executed several of his viceroys and governors, men accused of ruling unjustly and robbing temples and tombs during his long absence in the east. At Susa, he arranged a magnificent mass marriage of Macedonian officers to 80 Persian noblewomen to strengthen bonds between his 2 kingdoms. Alexander himself married 2 Persian princesses. He also paid all his soldiers' debts and ordered 30,000 youths from across the empire to be trained in the Macedonian art of war. But at Opis, his Macedonian troops mutinied. They were offended by Alexander's apparent preference for Persian advisors and Persian ways. Alexander had the ringleaders executed and made a speech to the men, reminding them of the glories they'd won together and leading eventually to an emotional reconciliation. At Ecbatana, Alexander's closest and most trusted friend, Hephaestion, died of fever. The king was grief-stricken, went days without eating, and ordered a period of public mourning across the empire. Alexander waged a successful campaign against the mountain raiders of Kausea, who not even the Persian kings had been able to subdue. Returning to Babylon, he was met by embassies from distant peoples come to recognize his greatness. Ethiopians, Libyans, European Scythians, Lucanians, Etruscans, Gauls, and Iberians. Alexander's Bactrian wife, Roxana, was now pregnant, but as he planned his next campaign, to Arabia and beyond, he developed a sudden fever and died days later, aged just 32. The cause of Alexander's death has never been established. It may have been malaria, cholera, typhus, or poison. Alexander died undefeated in battle. Alexander the Great left behind a huge empire, stretching from Greece to India. But with his death, it was an empire without a ruler. His young widow Roxana was pregnant with an unborn child, who would, if a male, become his heir, but he would not be able to take on Alexander's mantle for many years. The high command therefore appointed one of their number, Perdiccas, as regent. They then divided Alexander's empire up amongst themselves, each taking a major province to rule as governor. They, plus their sons and 1 or 2 others who would come to prominence in the years ahead, have gone down in history as the successors, because they succeeded to the rule of Alexander's conquests. One aspect of the period immediately following Alexander's death was that some of his policies, which had been particularly dear to him, were abandoned. Many of his senior officers set aside the Persian wives he had forced them to marry, and Alexander's moves towards creating a single Macedonian Greek-Persian ruling class came to nothing. There began almost 50 years of wars, coups, alliances, counter-alliances, betrayals, assassinations, and mutinies. In all these complex goings-on, a pattern developed by which any one of the successors who attained a preeminent position amongst the rest would attract an alliance of the others to bring him down. Alexander's own gold sarcophagus, en route to Macedonia for burial, was hijacked and ended up in Alexandria, in Egypt. Today, its location remains one of the world's great unsolved mysteries. Some of the successor kingdoms to his great empire were short-lived, others endured for centuries, but all in turn would fall to new forces. And in the West, to the rising power of Rome.